UFC Fight Night Burns versus Brady is happening tomorrow, September 10th, Saturday night. My whole shtick is that I'm gonna only go by based off of their last fight. You're only good as your last fight, and obviously barring more popular fighters that I already know about, but like these prelim fighters, not super familiar with. So I'm only gonna base my opinions based off of how well their last fight went. I know. So we're gonna start off the night with Zigomanis Ramaska versus Nathan Fletcher. Zigomanis, nice striker. He throws punches and kicks with some nice heat. His combos coming forward are very nice, and he keeps his opponents from being able to get back in the game after he kind of has them a little bit taken off kilter almost, you know. Fletcher seems to be decent, but he lost his last fight to Offley, who is a really similar style to Ramaska, and he's just a bit shorter. So unless he lands like a really nice counter, because Ramaska kind of keeps his head in the same spot, so he does get countered even by shorter fighters. Unless he lands a nice counter on Ramaska, I think he's just going to get worn down and then potentially stop. So I'm going to lean towards Ramaska taking this fight. Next is going to be Andre Petroski versus Dylan Budka. Petroski, very good wrestling. His last fight, he was able to control his opponent the entire fight, but not able to reach a finish. And I think that's more leaning towards his opponent having really good defense rather than Petroski not being skilled on the ground. He seems to have decent power in his hands, and so I'd like to see him utilize that a bit more because in the last fight he knocked the guy down initially and then just tried to chase the submission on the ground, which didn't work out for him. It still went his way. He just wasn't able to get a finish from it. Budka is also a wrestling style, but he doesn't have as good a control as Petroski did to his fight, and he did not seem to have a good gas tank in his fight. So I'm kind of leaning towards Arlovsky either taking it by submission or knocking him out if he decides to keep it standing up. Next, we're moving on to Amarim versus Demopoulos. So Amarim, great ground game, insane reach, like very long arms for her height. Her previous opponent had I think it was like an 8-inch reach disadvantage, you know? Her Demopoulos' come forward style, she had a close fight her last fight and she edged a split decision. But if she tries to do the same thing against her opponent that she did, or that she did against her opponent against Amarim, I think she's gonna get like picked apart kind of at a distance a bit. So we'll see how that fight lands. I'm more leaning towards Amarim. Next, we move on to Gabriel Santos versus Yija. Santos, strong, come forward fighter with power in his hands. His ground game is pretty decent, but he needs work on controlling his opponents when he is on the ground. He gets a little too excited. His striking and his combos looked good, and he just ended up getting caught in his last fight, you know? And, you know, it happens. You know, puncher's chance. MMA is a fluke. You know how it is. Yija seems to be a very wrestling-focused fighter. He's got good striking that he can use if Santos isn't careful and gets a little bit lax in his defense. He's got really good kicks, and his transition to subs on the ground look really nice. I'm leaning towards Yija, and I think he'll take it, but I wouldn't be surprised either if Santos takes it. I think it's a pretty even fight. We move on to Andre Lima versus Dos Santos. Andre Lima came in overweight, committed multiple fouls that he mostly got away with. But his leg kicks are strong. He manages distance well, keeps a solid defense. Dos Santos' last fight was a robbery. I thought he lost his last fight. He got wrestled and controlled the majority of the fight while like landing a few big shots here and there, but nothing I think that should give him the round. But with like the damage-based scoring, I guess you kind of have to lean towards that. Like if a fighter lands two really good shots but is controlled the rest of the round, that's difficult for me to like judge, but I would lean more towards control time rather than damage if the damage is minuscule as far as the round goes. Anyways, he got wrestled and controlled. Majority of the fight, landed a few big shots here and there. His opponent was pretty unorthodox, but still landed a lot of body shots when he wasn't wrestling him on the ground and controlling him on the ground. So I'm going to lean towards Lima just based off of their performances. I'm not really sure about I know Lima had good wrestling defense. I don't know if he's an offensive wrestler, but if he is, I think that's a very good weapon against Dos Santos, who really didn't have a wrestling defense game against his last opponent. So we'll see. Next, we're going to Dolgarian versus Marat. Bulgarian has good wrestling. His last fight being a split is a good indicator of his level in the eyes of different judges when he fights. I thought he had that one kind of clearly. His wrestling is good, and I do think he needs to work on his striking, and I hope he has since his last fight. Marat got starched by McKinney. And I think we already know where McKinney's level is at. He also has a wrestling style, but I don't know if he's on the level of Dolgarian, you know? So I'm going to lean more towards Dolgarian, either submitting him or winning by decision. So that's just my opinion. There we go. Next is going to be Rongju versus Chris Padilla. So Rongju, great, clean striker with good defensive wrestling, takedown defense. His punches are clean. He's accurate. His kicks seem to have like really decent power, even when his opponent blocks him. I noticed in his last fight. So, and then once he has his timing, he really like builds off of it if his opponent lets him. So like if you're staying in his range and you're kind of letting him take shots at you while not throwing anything back, he starts to build off of his combos and he gets into a rhythm, and it's very clean and very effective. Um, his combos are nice, timing really good. Padilla is a really good wrestler. He's got nice takedowns and he has some good counter shots, like an overhand right. I feel like every wrestling heavy fighter has a good overhand right because it allows them to transition into like a takedown, you know? Um, he can get people to the ground, but he seems to struggle with maintaining control, and he does let his opponent to get up. And I think if he lets Rongju get up, he's going to get timed. Rongju was able to time his last opponent. His last opponent was also a heavy wrestler. He timed him with knees when his opponent was shooting. He like stuffed his takedowns with a sprawl. And I think if Padilla lets him get up and lets him get that timing down, I think he's just going to be able to keep it on the feet and just start picking Padilla apart. So I'm going to lean towards Rongju for a decision, just because I don't know how good Padilla's chin is, but I'm going to lean towards decision, but I definitely wouldn't be surprised if he stops him. Next, we're moving on to Trevor Peek versus Yanal Ashmuz. So Ashmuz, very good defensive striker. He's got really good head movement, even while on the defensive. His strikes with punches and legs are really clean. Like he's able to put together really good combos. I didn't see too much of his ground game. I'm sure he has one because he did try to shoot a takedown in his last fight and was simply unsuccessful in getting it. And unfortunately, in his last fight, he blocked a leg kick and it hurt his left hand. And so for the rest of the fight, he was basically fighting one-handed. I don't know if it broke or what ended up happening. I didn't look it up. I should have, but I didn't. So it's a real shame. But even though he had a hurt left hand, he was still throwing kicks, still throwing punches, still trying to win the fight. And his opponent was, unfortunately for him, just on a different level. That night, maybe a different night. If he doesn't get that injury, they have a closer fight. But man, his opponent was really getting to work, started getting in his rhythm, started getting in his groove, started landing really bad knees, really bad punches. And then, of course, after the first round, like he no longer had the ground game option, so, just started getting kind of beat up on the feet, both by punches and knees and stuff like that, even though he had good defense. Now, Trevor Peek, love me Trevor Peek. Trevor Peek fights are always fun to watch. He's a very unorthodox striker. He relies on his chin to get through the fire and land his shots. He came up short against a more cleaner striker who ended up holding him down for like the last round. In a fight that was getting closer. Trevor Peek was starting to land his shots. He was starting to wear down his opponent. He was still getting cracked and hurt as well, but Trevor Peek, love him. Love him. He had moments of success. He hurt the fighter he was fighting, and unfortunately just ended up coming up short. Happens. I don't know if he has the best ground game. It didn't seem like it. And if Ashmuz does have a good ground game, then I think he can definitely exploit that. So my heart says Peek, my head says Ashmuz, but I'm going to lean towards Peek second round KO because I love my boy Peek. All right. So Matt Schnell versus Cody Durden. So Matt Schnell, his last fight was against who's the guy that just lost? He just lost to Kai Kara France. Steve Urseg. And man, they had some good scrapping for the one round it lasted, unfortunately. But in the pocket, he was able to catch Urseg when Urseg was getting a little too ambitious, kept him honest. Urseg has really clean, crisp boxing, and I thought Schnell, at least in the first round, was holding his own. So he would take hits, but he would also land his own. And unfortunately for him, I just think after that first round, Ursig just put the pace on him, and then man just landed that shot right on the chin and knocked him out. But I thought in the first round going in was pretty even, But Ursig won the first round. Don't get me wrong, but I thought he was holding his own with the boxing. He also defended a lazy takedown attempt from Ursig, so it was fine. It just happens. Urseg's on the come up, and well, on the come down now since his last fight, but happens. He has Cody Durden, slightly awkward striking style, although he is able to land some nice counters. His wrestling and submission game seems to be pretty strong. I can see him having success if he decides to take it to the ground, just because we didn't see Matt Schnell's wrestling defense in his last fight. But he also lost his last fight by taking a clean shot and then getting ground and pounded. So who knows? But I think Matt Schnell has the crisper boxing, and I think he might probably take the fight just because of his cleaner striking, unless Durden gets him on the ground and really tries to submit him. So Durden did have really good submission attempts, and I just think his last opponent just had and also a really good ground game as well. So if he does get him to the ground, if Cody Durden does get Schnell to the ground, I can see him winning there and potentially submitting him. But if Schnell can keep it on the feet, I think he kind of picks him apart with his boxing. So next is going to be Kyle Nelson and Steve Garcia. So Kyle Nelson, powerful striker, decent defense. A bit sloppy, and he has problems with swinging way heavy when his opponent's on the back foot and misses some shots that I think if he were to just calm down a bit and, kind of come in with a more measured approach, I think he would land a lot more than he does in his fight. He does seem a bit susceptible to leg kicks. So, Garcia seems to have decent striking, heavy hands, very similar to Nelson. And I think I'm just going to lean towards Nelson just because of his athleticism, even though his last fight was a bit controversial because it got stopped when the guy was still standing. So I know people weren't happy about that. And then Garcia's fight, he just kind of starched the guy. So he's got heavy hands. I think it'll be a fun fight. I think one of them's going to sleep, and I'm looking forward to it. So. And then Andrade versus Natalia Silva. Andrade's a good fighter. She's short for her division now, but she's got good power, and her boxing is clean, and she's got good wrestling submissions. She's a staple of the women's division. Silva's being the younger fighter on the come up, good kicks and strikes, and she's got good takedown defense. Her kicks are fast and accurate, but I noticed in her last fight she does seem to get a bit nervous when she's fighting for the first round. And that nervous energy allowed her opponent to get her to the ground for the first round. She was able to get up with her defense, so that's good, and then was able to land some nice strikes afterwards. But I think if you let Andrade get you to the ground like that, I think you might be in for a rough time. So as long as she comes in measured, a little bit calmer, and can keep her at range, I think she can take this fight. But I'm kind of going to lean towards Andre just being the more experienced fighter. And, she just is built like a man. So what are you going to do? And now, last but not least, Gilbert Burns versus Sean Brady. Now, I love Gilbert Burns. A dog. Good hands. Great jiu-jitsu. He's always there to fight, He's getting a bit up there. And I think that's the biggest issue is just his age. He's just starting to age out in his division. Which is a bummer because he's a fun fighter to watch. Always love to watch Gilbert Burns. He struggled with striking against Madalena, but that's Jack Della Maddalena. He's got great striking, so I'm not super surprised by that. He did have success getting him to the ground, and then Madalena just happened to have really good wrestling defense and stand up. So uh, great, awesome, good fight. Fun to watch. And now he's going to be fighting Brady, who also is a wrestling heavy fighter. But Brady, however, is a big dude. He's strong. His last fight, Kelvin Gastelum, was basically bullying him on the ground. Just kind of doing whatever he really wanted to. He's got good transitions. He's got good sub attempts. And even though it's not like his strong suit, he does have heavy hands. Like his striking could probably be a little bit crisper, but he'll probably be focusing more like on takedowns since he'll be fighting Gilbert Burns. I think he wants to be sure that he's prepared for that. But I mean, his striking is not bad. I thought obviously against Gastelum, he's not going to do a lot of striking because Gastelum is going to be the better striker. But against even like Bilal, I thought he was doing really well, like the first round up until he got caught. He was landing some good strikes on Bilal. I think he even knocked him down in the first round, if I'm remembering that correctly, but I don't know. But anyways, he's got good power. And if Burns tries to stand with him, I'm afraid of him getting cracked. It could happen. Burns has gotten hurt before, but he has like a good enough ground game to survive it. But with someone as big as Brady, who's also very successful on the ground, I wouldn't be surprised if he does crack him on the feet that he gets down to the ground and finds a sub on him. But I'm leaning towards Brady just because he's the younger and seems to be the stronger fighter. And I think if he can land on the stand up and avoid letting Burns do what he wants on the ground, I think he can take this fight. I'm leaning towards Brady by sub or a ground and pound. I think he's going to get the finish. If it goes the distance, I'm not surprised either because Burns is just good. So those are my predictions. Be sure to leave a like and a comment if you enjoy the content, and I'll be watching along with you guys tomorrow night.